The night I almost got caught, there was a stranger standing inside my house, breathing quietly behind the laundry room door, while my husband slept upstairs believing he was married to a good woman. I remember staring at the digital clock on the microwave. 2017 a.m. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding in my chest. My palms were slick with sweat, but my face stayed calm. That's always been my strength. Staying calm while everything burns. My husband Daniel had fallen asleep early like he always did on work nights. 12 years together had trained him to trust routine. He trusted that when I said I was going downstairs to grab water, that's exactly what I was doing. He trusted that the doors were locked because I always checked them. He trusted me, behind that door with a man whose name I wouldn't remember a week later. I wasn't panicking because a stranger was in my house. I was panicking because I knew how close everything was to collapsing, and I still didn't feel regret. Only adrenaline. Only the rush of almost. I'd been married to Daniel for 11 years. I met him in my early 20s, back when stability felt romantic and safety felt like love. He was gentle, predictable, deeply loyal, the kind of man people trust instinctively, the kind of man who never checked my phone, never asked follow-up questions, never imagined I could lie to him. And I did. From the beginning. Not because I hated him, not because he mistreated me, but because something inside me always felt hollow, like a room no one could enter, not even me. I chased attention the way some people chase sleep or silence, desperately, thoughtlessly, constantly. It started small, lingering conversations, smiles held a second too long, compliments I didn't shut down. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself everyone needs to feel wanted sometimes. By the time Daniel proposed, I already knew how easy it was to split myself into versions. The wife, the flirt, the secret. And I learned quickly that confidence covers guilt better than apologies ever could. That night, with the stranger hidden downstairs, wasn't the first time I'd crossed a line. It was just the closest anyone ever came to seeing who I really was. And even then, Daniel slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that his marriage had been a performance for most of its life. If you find this story good, please like and subscribe our channel. It's free for you, but helps us a lot to keep sharing real stories like this. I waited until my breathing slowed before moving. The man behind the door didn't speak. He knew the rules without me saying them. That's another thing people don't talk about. When you live this way long enough, secrecy becomes a language, a look, a pause, a shared understanding that you don't exist when you're not supposed to. I opened the back door quietly and motioned for him to leave. No words, no apologies, just disappearance. When the door clicked shut, I leaned against the counter and smiled, not because I was relieved, because I had survived again, and survival had become my addiction. The morning after that night didn't feel dramatic. It felt ordinary, and that was what unsettled me most. Daniel woke up before his alarm, like he always did, stretching and groaning softly beside me. He brushed his hand across my back, half asleep, and mumbled that he'd make coffee. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every second from a few hours earlier. Not with fear, but with a strange, buzzing alertness. Like my body was still awake even though the danger had passed. When he came back upstairs holding 2 mugs, he smiled at me the same way he always did, warm and unguarded. "You didn't sleep great, did you?" he asked gently. I shrugged and blamed a headache. He accepted that immediately. No suspicion, no follow-up, just concern. That trust did something twisted to me. It didn't soften me. It hardened me. I watched him get dressed for work, moving through our bedroom like it was a safe place, like it hadn't almost become the scene of something unforgivable hours earlier. When he kissed me goodbye and told me he loved me, I said it back without hesitation. The words came easily. They always did. Lying had never required effort from me. It was honesty that felt unnatural. After he left, I cleaned the house methodically, not because there was evidence, but because order calmed me. I wiped down surfaces that were already clean, folded blankets that hadn't been touched, erased a night that technically hadn't happened. The stranger was gone, but the feeling he left behind lingered. Not desire. Control. This wasn't the first time I balanced on the edge like that. Years earlier, when our marriage was still new, I'd learned how much I could get away with by accident. A coworker who lingered too long in conversation. A gym trainer who complimented me a little too personally. I never shut those moments down. I collected them, stored them away like proof that I still existed outside of being someone's wife. At first, I told myself it was harmless. Everyone likes attention. Everyone wants to feel seen. But harmless things don't need to be hidden, and I hid everything. Daniel never noticed the shift because there wasn't one. I didn't withdraw from him. I didn't pick fights or grow distant. I learned early that neglect creates suspicion, so I did the opposite. I was affectionate, present, engaged. I planned date nights, remembered anniversaries, asked about his day, and listened closely enough to respond convincingly. If anything, I was a better wife while living a double life. That realization disturbed me more than the actions themselves. The men came and went without leaving much of an impression. That was intentional. I avoided anyone who wanted depth or commitment, anyone who asked questions, anyone who tried to imagine a future. I chose people who wanted the idea of me, not the reality. People who didn't care where I went afterward or who I belonged to when I wasn't with them. They were moments, not relationships. Still, there were times when the line blurred, when someone lingered emotionally longer than I allowed. That's when things got dangerous. I learned to recognize the warning signs quickly. The text messages that shifted in tone, the looks that lasted too long. The expectation. That's when I disappeared. I'd change my routine, cut contact cleanly, block numbers without explanation. I never looked back. Attachment was a liability. Detachment was survival. The night with the stranger in the house was the closest I'd ever come to losing control, not because he was there, but because I'd underestimated how bold I'd become. Inviting someone into our space wasn't an accident. It was escalation. Proof that the secrecy had stopped feeling risky enough. What terrified me afterward wasn't the possibility of being caught. It was the realization that I'd wanted to see how far I could go. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a shift in myself. Not guilt, but impatience. The usual distractions didn't satisfy me the way they used to. The attention faded faster, the rush dulled quicker. I found myself craving the tension more than the connection. Daniel remained oblivious. He trusted consistency, and I gave it to him. He never checked my phone, never questioned my late errands, never wondered why I sometimes seemed wired when nothing had happened. His faith in me was absolute. Sometimes late at night, I'd lie awake beside him and imagine what it would look like if he knew. Not the confrontation, but the aftermath. His confusion. The way he'd search his memory for signs he'd missed. I imagined him blaming himself, wondering what he'd done wrong. That thought didn't stop me. It made me feel strangely removed, like I was watching someone else's life unfold from a distance. I told myself I was in control, that I could stop whenever I wanted, that this was a phase, a response to something temporary inside me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Control implies intention, and by then my actions were driven by compulsion. The emptiness didn't come and go, it waited. Every close call reinforced the same dangerous lesson. I could survive anything as long as I stayed calm. I could talk my way out of anything as long as I didn't panic. I could rewrite reality if I spoke with enough certainty, and Daniel would believe me. There were moments when I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because the person looking back felt hollow. Like a shape filled with movement but no substance. I wondered if this was who I'd always been, or if I'd slowly become someone else without noticing. I never shared these thoughts with anyone. Not friends. Not strangers. Definitely not my husband. Confession requires wanting to be understood, and I didn't. I wanted to be untouched. By the time months had passed, the incident in the house had stopped feeling like a warning and started feeling like a milestone. A line crossed that proved something irreversible about me. I wasn't scared anymore. I was curious, and curiosity, I would learn, was far more dangerous than fear. By the time curiosity replaced fear, my life stopped feeling divided. It felt layered, like everything existed at once, stacked neatly, each version of me stepping forward when required. The wife, the liar, the observer. I moved between them without friction, and that scared me less than it should have. Daniel and I hosted a small dinner party one evening, just a few friends, wine, laughter, familiar stories repeated for the 10th time. I played my role effortlessly. I touched his arm when I laughed. I leaned into him when someone told a joke. I watched how people looked at us and felt a strange pride in how convincing we were. We looked solid, enviable even. At one point, I caught my reflection in the dark window behind the dining table. I looked relaxed, happy. No one could have guessed what lived behind my eyes. That invisibility was intoxicating. Later that night, after everyone left and the house settled back into quiet, Daniel wrapped his arms around me from behind while I rinsed glasses at the sink. He rested his chin on my shoulder and asked if I was happy. The question came out of nowhere, soft and unguarded. I froze for half a second too long before answering yes. He believed me. That pause haunted me more than any near discovery ever had, because for the first time I wondered if he could sense something without understanding it, or worse, if he sensed nothing at all. Around that time, I started noticing how much I relied on my ability to read people. I'd always been good at it, sensing shifts in tone, changes in energy, subtle cues others missed. I used that skill constantly, especially with Daniel. I knew when he was tired enough not to question me, when he was stressed enough to be distracted, when he needed reassurance instead of clarity. I wasn't manipulating him out of malice. It felt more like maintenance, like tending to something fragile that couldn't survive the truth. The emptiness inside me deepened, not dramatically, but steadily. A low hum that never shut off. Attention from others still gave me brief relief, but it faded faster each time. I began chasing situations rather than people, moments that felt like standing on a ledge. The risk itself became the reward. There was another incident, quieter than the one with the stranger, but more revealing. Daniel and I were supposed to meet friends for dinner. I was running late, deliberately so, and when I walked in, I saw the look on his face shift from concern to relief. He apologized for being impatient. I smiled and brushed it off. I realized then that no matter how unreliable I became, he would always adjust himself before questioning me. He bent inward. I expanded outward. The imbalance was subtle but devastating. I started imagining what would happen if I stopped lying. Not confessing everything, just stopping. Staying where I said I was. Being exactly where I claimed. The idea felt unbearable, like suffocation. The lies weren't just cover, they were oxygen. One night, lying awake while Daniel slept, I tried to trace the emptiness back to its origin. Childhood. Adolescence. Early adulthood. I searched for a wound, something that would justify me. I found nothing dramatic enough to excuse what I was doing. No single moment where something broke. Just a gradual realization that being wanted felt better than being known. Being known meant limits, expectations, accountability. Being wanted meant possibility. The house itself began to feel like a stage. Every room held memories layered with secrets. The laundry room where I'd held my breath. The kitchen where I'd smiled through lies. The bedroom where Daniel slept, believing in me completely. I moved through those spaces with ease, but sometimes, late at night, they felt like they were watching me. I never felt haunted by guilt. I felt haunted by awareness. There was a stretch of time when nothing happened at all. No risks, no near misses. I focused on work, on routine, on normalcy. From the outside, my life probably looked healthier than ever. But inside, the stillness felt unbearable. Without tension, I felt flat, unresponsive. Like a screen left on too long. That's when I understood that the danger had rewired me. The part of me that once sought validation now sought intensity. I wasn't chasing people anymore. I was chasing sensation, the feeling of being on the edge of exposure, of balancing everything with precision. Daniel noticed my restlessness but interpreted it as stress. He suggested a vacation. A break. Something to reset. I agreed enthusiastically because agreeing cost me nothing. We traveled together, spent days exploring, nights talking quietly in hotel rooms. For a moment, I wondered if change was possible, if distance from routine might loosen whatever grip this had on me. But even there, even in unfamiliar places, I felt the same pull. The same low-level dissatisfaction, the same need to feel something sharper. On the last night of the trip, Daniel told me he felt closer to me than ever, that he was grateful for our life, that he trusted me completely. Trust. The word landed heavy in my chest. I kissed him and said all the right things, but inside, something shifted, not remorse, something colder. I realized then that his trust wasn't protecting him, it was isolating him. He had no defenses because he didn't believe he needed any. And I was the only threat. Back home, routine resumed seamlessly. If anything, Daniel seemed lighter, reassured. I felt heavier. The awareness that I could continue indefinitely settled in. I could keep going, keep lying, keep balancing everything without consequence. That knowledge didn't comfort me. It hollowed me out. I began to see myself less as someone making choices and more as someone responding to an internal demand, like hunger, like thirst, something that couldn't be reasoned with, only temporarily quieted. I wondered how many people lived this way, how many smiled through dinner while carrying entire lives no one else could see. I wondered if secrecy was more common than honesty, if trust was just a convenient illusion we all agreed not to challenge. The scariest part wasn't that I was capable of destroying my marriage. It was that I could imagine doing it calmly, rationally, without emotion, and that made me question whether there was anything left inside me that could stop what was coming next. The first crack didn't come from a mistake. It came from stillness. After months of balancing everything perfectly, I started to feel watched, not by Daniel, but by the life I was living. Like the walls had memorized my patterns, like routine itself was waiting for me to slip. I became hyper-aware of every sound in the house, every pause in conversation, every moment where Daniel's eyes lingered on me just a fraction longer than usual. Nothing had changed. That was the problem. He still trusted me completely, still assumed the best, still believed I was exactly who I presented myself to be. And yet, I felt closer to exposure than ever before, not because I was careless, but because I was tired. Living like this takes energy, constant calibration, emotional accounting, knowing when to speak, when to stay silent, when to be affectionate, when to retreat. For years I'd managed it effortlessly, but exhaustion crept in quietly, like a leak you don't notice until the damage is done. One evening, Daniel suggested we have dinner without our phones, no distractions, just us. It sounded innocent enough, even healthy. I agreed instantly, smiling, but inside my chest tightened. I hadn't realized how much I relied on those small barriers between us until the idea of removing them made me uneasy. We sat across from each other at the table, the house dim and quiet. He talked about work. I responded appropriately. Then there was a pause, a long one, not awkward, just open. He looked at me carefully, not suspiciously, but with focus, the kind of attention that tries to understand rather than accuse. "You seem far lately," he said gently, "not unhappy. Just elsewhere." I felt my pulse spike, but my face stayed calm. I'd heard versions of this before. Concern framed as care. I told him I'd been thinking a lot, that I felt restless, that I didn't know why. None of that was a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. He nodded, relieved by my honesty or what he thought was honesty. He reached across the table and took my hand. That simple gesture unsettled me more than anger ever could have. It reminded me how much power I held without earning it. He suggested therapy, not because anything was wrong with us, he said, but because he wanted to support me if something was weighing on me. He said it casually, kindly, like an offering. I agreed. That should have been a turning point, a chance to unravel things before they went too far. But I didn't go to therapy to change. I went to refine. I learned new language, healthier words for emptiness, softer explanations for restlessness, ways to frame dissatisfaction without revealing its source. I talked about feeling unseen, about craving novelty, about losing myself in routine. All true. All incomplete. Daniel attended a few sessions with me. He listened. He reflected. He adjusted himself. He became even more attentive, more patient, more loving. I watched him do that and felt something close to grief, not for what I was doing, but for what he was giving. At home, the atmosphere shifted. The house felt quieter, heavier, not tense. just loaded. Like something unspoken sat between us, expanding slowly. I became more careful again, not because I wanted to protect him, but because I sensed the margins shrinking. I started dreaming about being caught. Not in dramatic ways, subtle ones. A text seen accidentally, a name overheard, a look interpreted differently. I'd wake up calm but alert, my mind already planning contingencies. The dreams didn't scare me. They prepared me. There was another moment, months later, that still stands out. Daniel came home early again, but this time I hadn't done anything wrong. No secrets in motion, no lies active. And yet, when I heard his car in the driveway, my body reacted as if I'd been caught mid-transgression. My heart raced. My breath shortened. I realized then that even innocence felt unsafe to me now. That's when it hit me. I wasn't hiding specific actions anymore. I was hiding myself. Everything about me had become provisional. Nothing could exist without being evaluated for risk. I didn't know how to be present without calculating. Daniel noticed my anxiety and blamed himself. He apologized for adding pressure. He told me he'd give me space, more room, more trust. It felt like being handed a weapon and told I'd never use it. I pulled away slightly after that. Not dramatically, just enough to breathe. I reduced the risks not because I wanted to stop, but because I needed to regain control. The hunger didn't disappear, but I managed it like a condition. Carefully, quietly. And yet, the incident with the stranger began resurfacing in my mind, not as fear, but as memory, as proof. I replayed the calm with which I'd handled it, the ease, the lack of consequence. It became a reference point, a reminder of who I was capable of being under pressure. I wondered if that version of me would always win. There were moments when I caught Daniel watching me, not suspiciously but thoughtfully. As if he were trying to connect dots that didn't quite align. He never voiced it, he never accused. But the awareness lingered. I started to realize something uncomfortable. Trust isn't just about belief, it's about pattern recognition. And even the most trusting person eventually notices inconsistencies, even if they don't understand them. That realization didn't push me toward honesty, it pushed me toward escalation. If exposure was inevitable, I wanted it to happen on my terms, not as an accident, not as a slip. I began testing boundaries again, subtly, measuring how much tension I could introduce before it registered. I was less interested in the attention now than in the reaction. Or lack of one. Daniel remained steady, and that steadiness became unbearable. Because the more he trusted me, the more alone I felt. Not misunderstood, unseen. I realized then that I didn't want to be forgiven. I wanted to be discovered, not for what I'd done, but for what I was. The problem was, discovery would destroy him. That was the paradox I couldn't escape. To be known would mean to hurt him. To protect him meant to remain invisible, and invisibility was killing something inside me slowly, quietly, without drama. I began to sense an ending approaching, not because I planned one, but because the balance felt unsustainable. Something would have to give. Either the lies would collapse or I would. I didn't know which scared me more. What I did know was this. I could no longer pretend that I was in control. I was reacting, managing, containing something that was growing beyond my ability to shape it, and deep down beneath all the calculation and calm, I felt a flicker of something new, not guilt, anticipation. Because whatever came next, exposure, confession, collapse it, would finally force an answer to the one question I'd been avoiding for years. Was there anything left in me that could choose differently? Or had I already crossed the point where choice no longer mattered? I didn't wake up one morning deciding to end anything. There was no plan, no dramatic resolve. What finally broke the balance was something quieter than fear and heavier than guilt, inevitability, the sense that I couldn't keep carrying myself this way without something collapsing. Daniel and I were sitting on the couch one evening, not talking, just existing in the same space. He was scrolling on his phone, occasionally showing me something he thought I'd find interesting. I nodded, smiled when appropriate, played my part. But inside, I felt strangely detached, like I was watching us from a distance. Two people sharing a life that only one of us fully understood. He put his phone down and leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Do you ever feel like life is exactly what you wanted, but somehow still not enough?" he asked. The question landed harder than anything he'd ever said to me. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because for the first time, the truth was right there, unfiltered, pressing against my chest. I finally realized something I'd been avoiding for years. I wasn't afraid of hurting him. I was afraid of being seen clearly, and finding out there was nothing inside me worth saving. I told him I didn't know, that sometimes I felt restless, that I felt like something was missing but I couldn't name it. It was the closest I'd come to honesty without crossing into confession. He nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting that answer. He told me he loved me, that people don't always have to be complete to be loved, that he wasn't going anywhere. His voice was steady, certain. That certainty broke something in me. I realized then that as long as he stayed exactly who he was, I could continue exactly who I was. His stability allowed my instability to thrive. His trust gave my secrecy room to breathe. Nothing external was going to stop me. Not fear, not love, not risk. Only awareness. That night, after he fell asleep, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing. I replayed everything, not the individual moments or faces, but the pattern. The way I'd moved through life collecting intensity and discarding meaning. The way I'd used attention as proof of existence because I didn't know how to generate it internally. I saw myself clearly for the first time, not as a villain or a victim, but as someone profoundly incomplete. And I understood something else, too. If I stayed, I would keep doing this. Maybe more carefully, maybe less often, but the hunger wouldn't disappear just because I promised it would. I wasn't wired for quiet contentment. I mistook peace for emptiness and chaos for feeling alive. Leaving wouldn't fix me, but staying would destroy him eventually. The next morning, I told him I needed space. Not a break, not a separation with rules and timelines, just space. The word felt intentionally vague, but it was the only honest one I had. He looked confused, hurt, but he didn't argue. He asked if there was someone else. I said no, that was the final lie. I moved out a week later. Friends framed it as a rough patch, a period of self-discovery, a healthy pause. Daniel framed it as support. He told everyone he wanted me to find whatever I needed. He defended me even when I wasn't there. I watched from a distance as he carried the narrative for both of us, protecting my image the way he always had. Living alone didn't bring relief, it brought silence. And in that silence, there was no one left to deceive but myself. Without the structure of marriage, without the constant need to manage perception, I felt exposed. Not freer, just visible. The attention still came when I reached for it. It always did, but it felt thinner now, less convincing, like I was trying to replicate a sensation that no longer worked the same way. I began to understand that my behavior hadn't been about desire or rebellion or even validation. It was about avoidance, avoiding the slow, uncomfortable work of self-confrontation, avoiding the realization that I didn't know how to be whole on my own. Daniel eventually asked for honesty, not details, just truth. He wanted to know if our marriage had ever been real to me. That was the hardest question I'd ever had to answer. I told him yes, because it was. The love was real. The care was real. What wasn't real was my ability to live inside that love without constantly reaching beyond it. What wasn't real was the version of myself I let him believe in fully. He listened quietly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask for more. When I finished, he nodded once and said he needed time. I respected that. For the first time, I didn't try to manage the outcome. We don't speak much now. When we do, it's polite, careful. There's grief there, but also clarity. He's rebuilding a life that no longer revolves around compensating for someone else's absence. I think, in some strange way, my leaving gave him the chance to be seen too. As for me, I'm still figuring out how to exist without intensity as fuel, how to sit with emptiness without immediately trying to fill it. It's uncomfortable, slow, unrewarding in the ways I used to measure things. But it's honest. I don't tell the story to justify myself or to seek forgiveness. I tell it because people assume betrayal always comes from hatred or neglect or obvious unhappiness. Sometimes it comes from something quieter and more dangerous, from not knowing how to be enough for yourself, even when someone else believes you already are. If you find this story good, please like and subscribe our channel. It's free for you, but helps us a lot to keep sharing real stories like this.